Welcome everybody to the Cannabis Review Show 2020 review. I am joined by Matthew O'Brien, the editor of the world-renowned 4pm Cannabis newsletter. Matt, how are you keeping?
Fantastic, sir. How's the Christmas?
All is going good with me, mate. All is going good with me. I'm looking forward to starting 2021 on a good foot. So hopefully we all get to do a bit more traveling soon. I've got my flights booked to the Emerald Cup in March, so my fingers are crossed that I get to go over there for that. That's all I'm pretty much worried about this year.
That'll be a treat, yeah. I'd say there'll be a lot of individuals lining up to attend that event. I'm sure there was disappointment it wasn't on this year, but all the more reason to look forward to next.
Well, that's why I had Tim Blake, the guy who set up the whole Emerald Cup, on the show there just before Christmas. So he's guaranteed me that I'm going to get to be the first European judge that they bring into the Emerald Cup after my begging and pleading. And he's also guaranteed me a goodie bag, which he says to me have become world renowned between his friends. So I'm praying COVID is gone by March, mate.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed, fingers crossed. Thanks, everybody, for watching the show so far this year. And I'm sure Matt will say the same about everybody who's read his newsletter. It's very much appreciated, the counts and the views and the likes on all the shows. So we thought we'd bring you a little end-of-year review, the kind of top 5 big topics that have happened in the cannabis industry on a global scale this year. So I'm going to jump off with the first one, and it's the pretty big one that everybody kind of knows of that happened this year. Happened in December. We had the UN Commission reclassifying cannabis. So there was a review where the World Health Organization recommended cannabis and its derivatives be taken off Schedule 4 of the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotics. So it was a pretty momentous day. It allows for a number of different avenues for the cannabis industry to take, most notably the ability to be able to test and create new research and development. So, Matthew, I think you'll agree this was a pretty massive one for the year so far.
Huge. I think that when we look back on the year that was, like, there was a pretty clear winner across any industry, and it was cannabis. I think this one most notably sort of stands out at the top because you had, I think it was like 27 nations voting in favor of reclassifying cannabis. And I think what's probably going to be most interesting a decade from now is that when we look back on the nations that preceded Canada to actually go on to legalize cannabis for adult use purposes, I think that the majority of the 27 nations that voted in favor of reclassifying cannabis are going to be the ones who actually proceed to legalize cannabis. So it's a huge signal by each of these nations that there is obviously a desire to change the current legislative status of cannabis in their specific region. And I think that this was sort of the prerequisite towards what is going to be a pretty wide-scale adoption of a new approach to how it is that we regulate the consumption of cannabis.
Yeah, I agree. The one thing I was worried about leading up to this vote is that we were going to get a no, and it would just lead to a market where you had synthetic cannabinoids made by pharma companies, because cannabis would have been still on that "you're not allowed to touch it" list, but we're allowed to make a fake version in a lab somewhere and create little pills that you can all take at a huge exorbitant cost. So I think that was the one thing that took away from me, is that you could now, if you've got the capital, set up a lab in any European country, apply for a license for research and development, and begin testing for new products. So there's places like Greenlight Pharmaceuticals over here in Ireland who are kind of pretty much one of the leaders in that. I think you know James, Dr. James as well, Linden. So yeah, I think it was a pretty momentous one all in all for the year for this one.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I guess on another note, the fact that the US voted in favor of this legislative change is pretty telling. Like, obviously cannabis is still a Schedule 1 narcotic in that part of the world. Yet, in spite of that, they have one of their delegates voting in favor of altering the current legislative status of cannabis in a different region, which is ultimately applicable to individuals back in the US. So I think we can expect to see the US proceed to legalize cannabis. And I think that when we sort of connect the dots in hindsight, I think this is going to be one of the more important ones.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the American companies are going to be world leaders when it comes to this whole industry, and they've set up a market now for Europe for their companies to be able to come over and sell their products to. And if we know one thing about America, it's capitalism is a good thing. So I think this is definitely a prelude to some big news that might happen in 2021 for the cannabis industry in the US. So I'm going to go on to topic number 2, mate. This is your topic. I'll leave you to chat to the folks about everything.
Yeah, so the second one, and for me, as someone who primarily covers the European market, it was the designation of cannabis businesses as being essential. So I need not state, but start of the year, a lot of business leaders were making plans for each quarter. Unknown to these individuals, obviously there was a virus in China that had plans of its own. Coronavirus happens, and we all know what happens next. Yet, in spite of the fact that there was a global pandemic which was primarily affecting individuals' respiratory systems, cannabis businesses were declared as essential in just about every region across North America. Now, what I personally find most interesting about this, as someone who comes from Ireland, is that if you sort of put the two current legislative states of cannabis side by side in Europe and in North America, you have one region that is quite literally saying cannabis businesses are essential, while in another part of the world, just across the pond, they are designating cannabis as being a harmful substance. So clearly they are on opposite ends of the spectrum. And I don't think that there is coexistence, like only one of these statements can be true. And I think that is quite obvious to a lot of our listeners as to how this is going to play out.
Yeah, no, well, I agree. I think the one thing that I took away from the essential business with cannabis was the revenue that was generated, that I've been going through some of the financial firms that have been projecting revenues that have been taken in. Like Colorado, I read in September, had taken in 1.69 billion since in 9 months of the year. And it was like it had been 1.4 billion for the whole of 2019. So it just kind of proved, I think, the combination of stimulus checks and cannabis business being able to do door-to-door deliveries almost, it certainly, I think, gave a surge in revenue. And I think where you've got a surge in revenue, you've got an interest in funds, you've got an interest in the tax revenue being generated for the government coffers. So I think all in all, it was a hugely positive year for the cannabis industry. I know it keeps mad to say that so many industries burned to the ground, where the one industry that seemed to rise above that, I think virtual reality and the cannabis industry have been the two kind of dominant things that'll come out of this whole COVID intact with big returns behind them.
Yeah, big time. And I also think it's important to note the fact that, like, this was by definition a economic recession. Yet, in spite of that, to the point which you just alluded to, the growth of the industry was maintained. So while other industries were literally burning to the ground, the cannabis industry was actually increasing in the volume of products being sold.
Yeah, no, again, another great year, and let's hope this continues. That's actually a great idea that I was thinking about only the other day, that I can see drone delivery becoming a huge thing in the cannabis industry. Having a central hub that has a dispensary and having that 2 or 3 mile radius where a good drone can be dropping your prescription or your product into your back garden via a safe access, I think is definitely, again, going to be another way for consumers to be able to access their products without having to travel long distances.
No, I'd agree. The one thing I'd note about the cannabis industry in North America is their willingness to adopt new technology. Like, it's actually remarkable how wrong people are in the majority of nations as to what the cannabis industry looks like and how it operates. Like, the level of sophistication of the cannabis industry is absolutely absurd. Like, a lot of people say cannabis stores are on par with Apple stores. I wouldn't even take that a step further to say the sophistication of cannabis stores with iPads and like sophisticated algorithms that personalize product recommendations. Like, it is just so much more advanced than anyone is currently giving recognition to.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's definitely a reason to keep the pharmacy model away from the European consumers and allow for entrepreneurs and innovation to happen over here, just like it did in America, and deliver a far superior product at a better price point for consumers. So we're going to rock on to the next one. I think is another massive one. There were so many big things that happened this year. The Tilray Aphria merger. So it only happened recently, but it's becoming one of the big talked about topics now in the industry. And I think for a number of different reasons that people won't be thinking about. So if you read from the article here, the Tilray operates a cultivation facility in Portugal and Aphria has one in Germany. So these operations, in addition to 13,000 Aphria-owned German pharmacies and others throughout Europe, would enable tariff-free cannabis for the European Union. So it's one of those things that most people, I think, have let this fly under the radar, that these guys have pretty much bet long-term on the European industry. And it seems to me that they've got the logistics all in place now. If they can grow the product and sell it through their own stores, it's going to be a pretty good business model in the long term.
No, I'd have to agree, and it's a pretty large bet being made on the model which will be implemented in Europe. like to the point which you just made, like I would strongly agree that the best model for sake of the best cannabis industry is to let the free market reign, whereby entrepreneurs can come in, they can innovate, they can identify opportunities, identify problems, and implement solutions. Yet, if you do give like a state-granted pharmacy model, I do think that the largest benefactors of that are going to be the large companies, your Aphria, your Tilray, which are not literally Tilray. Besides that, like it'll be very interesting to see if any European companies can actually compete with them. As is the case in Canada, it was sort of initially thought that the biggest players were going to dominate the entire market. I think one of the more telling signs about this deal is that all is not right in Canada. Like Tilray, as an example, was struggling to gain market share. The quality of their products was just subpar in comparison to a lot of craft cannabis cultivators who were bringing products to market. So it'll be interesting to see just how much market share they can obtain and just how much market share they can actually retain over the long haul in Europe if the same products which they're making available in Canada are on par with the quality of the products that they're making available in Europe.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's definitely one to watch in the future, and part of me is praying that their business model doesn't work out, because the idea of just having one or two big companies selling their half-arsed products and average products at a high price point through a specific set of pharmacies is depressing, to say the least. So fingers crossed that good old capitalism comes in and wipes them off the path. So let's move on to topic number 4. This is your one, so I'll let you wax lyrical on this.
Yeah, for sure. So ultimately, there's a lot of celebrities that have come into the cannabis industry in recent times, as there have been celebrities who have given like pretty public endorsements of cannabis, from Elon Musk on the Joe Rogan show and consuming cannabis, which got him in a spot of bother with the regulators. But this to me was sort of a very telling moment for the cannabis industry culturally, in that you have what is widely recognized as an A-list celebrity, Jay-Z, entering the cannabis industry. It was effectively the coming together of a very established cannabis company, Caliva, who are a direct-to-consumer brand in California, in addition to the 12 brands which they brought together into the company Left Coast Ventures. Now, what I find most interesting about the SPAC, which is the investment vehicle which was used to effectively amalgamate these companies, is the role Jay-Z himself will be taking on. So he will be becoming the chief visionary officer of the company, which to many people they're probably asking, what the hell is the chief visionary officer? So in essence, Jay-Z is going to be personally dictating the direction of each and every brand within their portfolio, in addition to directing the social equity investments the company's making. So they're actually investing 2% of their, I believe it's their gross sales, that are going to be directed directly back into social equity ventures.
Okay, interesting. We've seen a number of celebrities kind of get in already, Wiz Khalifa and a few others, but they're pretty much predominantly already smokers and are kind of in the kind of culture already as being big smokers, have it in their music videos. Jay-Z getting in there seems a bit more refined and a bit more an upper class businessman getting into this industry. And I think, yeah, I think you might be dead right. It's putting your brand and your name on an industry that you didn't think was going to succeed. I don't think it's something that Jay-Z would be betting on.
110%. Like I think that for most people, if you look at the data, like it's very apparent that the cannabis industry's success is almost guaranteed at this point, in the sense that there is just so many people who are consuming cannabis in spite of it being illegal, that at the point in time which cannabis does become legal, like a lot of these individuals are just going to convert over because the stigma associated with consuming cannabis in the legal market is a whole lot less versus in a illicit market. But ultimately, even in legal markets, like there still is a lot of stigma that still surrounds the consumption of cannabis. And that's true in Canada. It's the same is true in Colorado, Nevada, et cetera, et cetera. So having someone like Jay-Z give such a public endorsement of the cannabis industry will likely make a significant contribution to the destigmatization of cannabis long term. And I think that alone is something to be celebrated. Now, whether or not this business venture actually succeeds, there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered in that area. But solely from the standpoint of celebrating the fact that someone is endorsing the industry to contribute to the destigmatization of the consumption of cannabis, for me is why this one was included in the top 5 moments of 2020.
Yeah, no, I think we've agreed on all four. They've been massive topics so far. Before I get to the last point, I just wanted to call out, like, I'm sure, like yourself, I had made a list where I, like, maybe have 15 things that could have been included throughout the year on some of the big things. You've got, yeah, a number of different research models. The More Banking Act. There was a YouGov poll in the UK that figured out that 2.6 billion per year has been spent on the black market in the UK, and I think there's a case for us doing even another part 5 of this, but we're not going to do that. We're going to move on to the very last topic, and I think this is one we both unanimously agreed should be on the show, seeing that we're both proud Irish men leading the light. So it was the decriminalisation of cannabis in Ireland. So what are your thoughts on what happened here, Matthew?
Yeah, honestly, I was really unpleasantly surprised as to how little media attention this received. However, unknown to many people, unless like you were specifically searching for key terms in Google, which is something I would do on a daily basis, is just cannabis in Ireland just to see what's happening on the Emerald Isle. But there was a specific move which was made by the Irish government whereby they have effectively decriminalised cannabis in Ireland. Now, it's sort of like a pseudo decriminalisation in the sense that they're not outright decriminalising cannabis in that an individual could, you know, walk into Dublin with 5 pounds of cannabis in their backpack and start selling it on Grafton Street. However, what they have put in place is a measure whereby if an individual, say one of ourselves or someone that we know, was actually caught consuming cannabis by a Garda, there would be little to no reason as to why that individual would be prosecuted. Now, instead, there would likely be sort of community service or something along those lines. But the removal of cannabis from the criminal framework and into more of a pseudo decriminalisation framework, something I think we should keep a very close eye on. Usually, it's a pretty telltale sign that a nation is intent on making further changes to the legislative status of cannabis. So if I was to make like a pretty out there bet, I would say within the next 5 years, we can expect that Ireland will legalize cannabis fully for adult use purposes.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you totally there. One of the things that I've found has been pretty ridiculous, though. As much as this has been a good step in the right direction, I don't know if you're keeping your eye on any of the media publications of Garda discoveries of cannabis. One of the things I've noticed about them, and it's something that we sent into the Garda Commissioner about, is their price point on what they're claiming that they're seizing on somebody is hilarious. There was a post there where this guy got caught with, I think it was like 17 kilos, and they valued it at 425,000 euro. So it was like almost 25 euro per gram if he was selling it in gram bags out of the back of his van. Whereas I know if you go to the States, you could be looking at $3 per gram. It's one thing that I think the police and the guards over here really need to step up their game on. Whoever the fuck is doing their figures and calculating the quantity, I know it sounds great for them to be able to put into the newspaper that we sold, but it undercuts your message, because anybody who knows what you're talking about knows you're full of shit. And if you're full of shit, then you need to have the consumer's confidence in the regulations that you're putting forward for people to actually want to back you in certain things. Because I think a lot of people in the cannabis industry would agree that tax revenue that comes from this industry should be reinvested in the police. It should be given back to the guards to be able to facilitate training courses, better equipment, better holidays, number of different applications that proper revenue should be able to do. So I think the guards need to get a little bit realistic with this industry and stop posting some of the crazy claims. But it's definitely a step in the right direction what they've done so far.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because like the book which I read, which sort of led me to where I am today, is Narconomics. And within that, they laid out like a pretty clear argument as to how it is that they currently misevaluate the value of drugs. And cannabis was like one of the primary examples which they were utilizing. But like to your point, like in Canada right now, there are full ounces of cannabis available for about $100. So you're looking at about $3 a gram, which is about €2. So the Irish government is currently miscalculating the street value of cannabis by a factor of 10, which is pretty outrageous when you take that into consideration. And I think that ultimately they just need to do more research on what this industry actually looks like, because to the point which we've made in multiple conversations, like the legalization of cannabis in Ireland is a question of when, not if. Like this is a foregone conclusion that this is going to happen. Now it's just a matter of what that actually looks like in practice.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more, mate. I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm hoping we make this a regular yearly thing where we can sit down at the end of every year and we can go through the top 5 topics that as we see the industry progress over the years. Because as we said, it's now if, it's not when. Anybody who thinks it's a when is living in the yesteryear, and there's relentless entrepreneurs like ourselves who are going to drive that narrative home and have the public support behind us. It's about creating products that are just easier accessible by a different range of consumers as opposed to just smokable flowers. So I think that will become a tiny percentage of the market, and innovative products, drinks, edible foods, tinctures, a number of different things are going to be the future of this industry over here.
Yeah, it was funny because having Christmas dinner just a few days back, I was remarking at the fact that like I personally don't consume alcohol. Like it's something which I stopped doing. Sort of embrace the idea of Cali sober, which is whereby like you're sober with the exception of cannabis. But I was sitting at dinner and I was like, man, like the amount of money I would currently pay to have access to a cannabis beverage is pretty outrageous. Like if someone had walked in the door and said, here's a cannabis beverage, it is 5 milligrams of THC, you know, it's Cannabis example, which is a popular company in California, I probably would have paid them like €100. And hilarious as it sounds, like I would have had no quarrel in paying that quantity of money to get access to that product. So, I'm with you. I'm also betting big on the future of beverages and other value added products.
Yeah, well, I can't thank you enough for taking part in this. It made me great to do the first one. And as I said, I hope we get to do this every year. We'll have a bit of crack. Hopefully next year we'll share a few edibles and we'll have a few infused drinks that we can consume during the show and see how lightning sharp we can be.
That sounds great to me, mate.
Yeah.
Thank you once again for the opportunity to come on the show. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoying all the interviews that you're putting on.
Yeah, and likewise, mate, your newsletter, for anybody who hasn't read it yet, 4 p.m., go and check it out. It's one of the most informative and highly educational newsletters that's available in the global cannabis industry at the moment. Matt writes with a great perspective and a deep understanding of the industry. So go check that out. Thank you very much for me sticking on. Everybody, thank you very much for watching. Happy New Year to everybody, and we shall see you in the new year for lots of new shows. Happy days, mate.
Sweet. Do you know one individual